I'm Brianna from Straight Press, and we're talking to Martin Gurri. Martin, welcome. So I had someone write a bio for you. It's by Adam Gurri, Martin's son, an analyst himself. So I'm going to read it to you.
Please, I'd like to hear it.
Yes. The relevant details about Martin Gurri for this Q&A can be summarized briefly. He was an analyst in media intelligence for decades who tried to bring his outfit into the information age. With the Revolt of the Public, he sought to show what a media intelligence could be by doing it himself. Seeing a problem, he sought to be the media analyst he wanted to see in the world. Now, for some less relevant details. Before he was in the CIA, he was an editor in the patent office, and before that, he was a janitor, scrubbing toilets.
Best job I've ever had. Most socially useful ever.
I'm sure letting you all know this won't embarrass him. He always proudly told his children that scrubbing toilets was the most socially useful job he ever did.
Yes.
He's a consistent man, Martin Gurri. He had the good fortune to come to America from Cuba at a time when Desi Arnaz made being Cuban cool.
It's true.
A little more relevant to the Revolt of the Public, but only a little, he has been exposed to tear gas on no less than 3 occasions.
Yeah.
I think there's a story or 3 there. Before his retirement, he always called himself a bureaucrat, yet he behaved more like a scholar. Each day he read book after book on subjects ranging from the history of media and the news to Islamic terrorism and its relationship to 19th century anarchism to the philosophy of David Hume. Those are the facts. If you want to know more, you are now free to ask the man himself.
Okay, how much did you pay him to say that?
$0. $0, 0 cents.
Let me tell you a story. Once upon a time, I was a CIA employee. I had what must have been considered the least glamorous and turned out to be, I think, the most consequential place in the organization. I was a media analyst. At the beginning of my career, that was an easy job. Every country had a tiny little trickle of open information that was mostly guided by what you would call an authoritative source, kind of like the New York Times was in the US. So if the President of the United States wanted to know, okay, how is my policy flying in France? You could go to Le Monde and say, well, here's what they said. And if you wanted to see the other side, you would go to Figaro, and the Figaro and Le Monde, you got the right and left, that's all there was. Very simple. And then something happened. The digital world happened. And what we saw was this tidal wave, I call it a tsunami of information, sweep around the world, just sweep around the world. And I was in that privileged perch, and I was watching it sweep around the world. And I could see behind that tidal wave tremendous social and political turbulence, just tremendous turbulence. What changed, obviously, in the information world from my happy early days where I could go to Le Monde, and today is every source of information you select for your analysis is in some sense arbitrary, because you're leaving out almost literally an infinite amount of stuff.
Yes.
And we're watching this happen, and we're saying, look, different. But CIA, like most industrial age institutions, has trouble seeing things that erupt from below.
Why do you think?
Well, because for them, everything is between governments. If the government doesn't do it, then it doesn't really matter. What do we care about that a bunch of Egyptians are suddenly online and saying ugly things about Mubarak? I mean, it seems funny now, but at the time it was very controversial, and we were told, so what are they going to do? If somebody comes with a gun at them, they're going to hit them with their laptop? So after not really getting very far with having done my job as a CIA analyst and explaining that this tremendous change was happening, I eventually left government. And it also occurred to me that as industrial democracy was toppling, democracy as a whole was kind of threatened.
Why did you write this book?
As a good citizen, I felt like if it is true that there's a peril to democracy, then I should come up with a clear explanation to where the peril is, and at least some inkling as to what we could do about it. As you know, the book came in 2 parts. The original was an ebook that was published in 2014, and then Stripe Press was kind enough to offer to publish the ebook, and I added a large essay at the end that kind of brought us up into the era of Trump and Brexit.
You've insisted many times that this is a book of kind of clinical observations. Why is that important to the book and how it's received?
I guess that's part of my CIA training there, all right? You should never look at a piece of information and just go, this is potential knowledge or potential falsehood. This is somebody who has a story to tell, and that person has a point of view, and it's embedded probably in some group that has probably a similar or somewhat similar point of view that they're trying to change or support or in some ways influence somebody, maybe you, maybe somebody else. As you add it all up, you see that pretty much all of society and all communications is an endless tussle for influence. I'm selling away a perspective of looking at the turbulence that we have today, not just in politics either, but in social life, and interpret it in such a way that you can understand the forces that are driving it. My favorite, of course, is the yellow vests in France, and I've been told again many times, well, you predicted that. In that particular instance, it was almost a textbook case of the kind of surge from below, protest from below that I describe in the book. They had no leaders, they had no programs, they had no organization, but they were firmly against what was going on, and they were triggered by something very insignificant.
Yeah, you talk about this in the book a little bit, this idea that groups are really good, especially on the internet, at gathering against something, but less so for. What is that? Is it human nature? Is it something else?
Well, that's what's different, I think, now, is if you wanted to be a protester or a radical, way back when I was a young man, you were probably a professional of some kind. You probably belonged to some group that had a structure of command, and you probably had yourself a printing press, and you probably certainly had yourself an ideology, and you espoused certain specific programs, and it was on behalf of that ideology, on behalf of those programs, that you took to the streets and demanded, this is what we want. Today, when you look, for example, at what happened in Egypt during the so-called Arab Spring, the people that showed up in Tahrir Square belonged to many, many different groups. They were left socialists, some of them. There were Muslim Brotherhood youth, some of them. There were all kinds of ordinary Egyptians that showed up. Normally, a group like that would have been too disparate to achieve anything. They were united in what they were against. They were against Mubarak, and that kept them going until the very end of the demonstrations.
Is this a force for or against democracy?
I mean, that's a hard question. Now, if you listen to the elites, who have a very loud voice, this is the end of the world as we know it, right? It's democracy is doomed, and you can find an article any day saying that democracy in America is finished, democracy in the world is finished. But that's not necessarily the case. I think what is to come may be a different kind of democracy. That was what stimulated me to write the book.
Yes, I think you would argue against this, but I do think the book gives us some tools to look into the future. So I want to talk to you about that.
Yeah, people keep telling me that.
Yes. I'll let you humbly disagree.
Understanding the present is hard. The future is impossible. And I'm hoping that by understanding the present, you make decisions, individuals, the readers, make decisions that bring us to a better future. My belief is people are agents. They decide on their own political beliefs. You look at Trump, and do you believe that people who voted for Trump are kind of like sort of like mindless, manipulated persons who read stories on Facebook that had been planted by Russians and therefore voted for Trump? Or do you believe that there was some reason that we need to understand why they voted for this man, right? You can see an object from 360 degrees and know it much better than if you're just standing at one point and say, that's really what it is. And that's my hope. I think we have a new way of dealing with information, and I think one thing that can come out of it is that. Obviously, we have a long ways to go, but I am optimistic.
The tagline for Stripe Press is Ideas for Progress. In the context of Revolt of the Public, what does that mean to you?
From a high level, I don't think that the world has changed so much. I mean, you have to have your principles, and the courage of your principles. And you have to have humility about the fact that in any given instance, your principles may not apply. So it seems to be a contradiction there, but it really is not. You should have your principles, stick by them, but humility tells you that you may be wrong.
At least part of the reason that Stripe was interested in this book is just to understand how institutions can build trust today. What advice would you give?
To the extent that somebody or some institution like Stripe, a business or a government, can show both humility in its assertions of fact and policy, and courage in sticking to its principles, you basically gain trust. I mean, this is not this is not something I have invented. This goes back to the beginnings of the human race.
Yes. Yeah, there's something very empowering about this concept that kind of we, members of the public, we can choose our elite in some way. What should we look for? Yeah,
I mean, I talked about that at the end of the book. I followed basically the suggestion by this great Spanish philosopher, Jose Ortega Gasset, that there is a kind of a mutual relationship between elites and the public, and that in a sense the public selects the elites. I think that's true. I mean, I think we give our votes and our money, and we buy the products, and we watch the TV programs and the movies of people who, by the virtue that we have done that, become elites. Now, when those elites start acting weird, in our opinion, they're still going to be there. You have to then say, okay, I'm not going to give my money, I'm not going to give my vote, I'm not going to pursue this individual or this product or this company or this political party or this politician because he has broken the vow with me, and I want somebody who is honest and who is courageous. Courage and humility are two virtues that I make a lot of, and that I think to the extent that we can get our elites to reflect those virtues, you will find a restoration of authority, which, by the way, is the whole project of the book. That's really what it is. How do you reconcile the public to the authority of these institutions that have to exist and these elites that have to run them?
Do you think this framework applies to other iconic figures, sports heroes, actors, musicians?
Applies to everybody. I'm a believer that expectations determine your optimism or pessimism. I believe that we're all naturally flawed human beings. I believe that we all make mistakes. I guess if you were to ask me what I hope for is to see this tremendous wave of information be used not to pummel each other for our natural human mistakes, but to learn to be more humble, and to learn to be more understanding, and to get as many perspectives, which is something we can do now that I could not 30 years ago. So,
yeah. Anything else?
That's it.
Martin, what a treat. That's a wrap.
All right.